Ian Rapoport of NFL Network that the Patriots are not expected to franchise tag J.C. Jackson. We've heard murmurs, rumors of this trending in this direction, but I don't know if anybody's actually put it out there as concretely as Rap Sheet did here this afternoon. But I think on one hand, you look at it and say $17.5 million cap hit with the franchise tag for cornerbacks this year, even with some cap maneuvering and some shakeups for the Patriots from a cap perspective. That was going to be their big move. If they franchised J.C. Jackson in free agency, it was going to be difficult to do something else major in the veteran market with that type of cap hit on the books for JC in 2022. So I'm not that surprised about the tag not being in play here for New England. But what is your reaction to it, Alex? And where do we go from here?
Yeah, I'm pretty surprised. I think you mentioned that would be their big move. Well, I don't know that there's a better move they can make.
Right.
I mean, they could, spread the money out, but the defense was they won games defensively last year. For them to win how they want to win defensively, right? They need that shutdown corner. I already had corners a top 3 need. If you lose Jackson now, it's probably 2 of the top 3. I mean, I think they're in the slot. I think they're fine in the slot. Jonathan Jones, it sounds like it's going to come back fully healthy. No issues from that shoulder injury. But you're looking at your boundary corners at Jalen Mills, who's a good corner, but we've talked about this, is probably best in that Jason McCourty role as a hybrid corner safety. Then it's Juwan Williams, your number 2 outside corner if Jackson walks.
Yeah.
Then Sean Wade, who we don't really know if he's a slot guy or a boundary guy yet. And then Justin Bethel, and that's the group. And that, that they can't play they can't play the way they want to play with that group. Now, are they going to shift to man here? Maybe, possibly. We'll see what they do in free agency. If they bring in a guy like Carlton Davis, that tells me they're just going to try to run it back. The other thing is if they shift to man, what does that mean for the linebackers? Right? You're talking about potentially having to overhaul the entire defense.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised. I'm surprised they're not bringing him back. He's an all-pro corner, 26 years old. I know the cap isn't in an ideal spot for them right now, but I think here's the thing. If they don't believe he's worth a long-term deal, then it's not worth tagging him and paying him $17.5 million against the cap to have him walk next year. I'm just a little surprised they don't want to give him a long-term deal, given the way everything looks right now.
Yeah, I think what it's more about is how the rest of the depth chart looks. And the fact is,
right,
in their system in particular, it's a lot easier said than done to just draft one of these guys that's going to work out on Sunday out of this cornerback group and say, we're just going to take Andrew Booth Jr. in the first round and he's going to be J.C. Jackson on day one. That's unrealistic. And I think a lot of people also expect, well, maybe this is a Malcolm Butler, Stephon Gilmore situation where there's another corner that they have their eye on that they like more than their own guy, and they're going to let JC walk and sign Carlton Davis to the big contract instead. But I think Carlton Davis has his flaws. I don't think Carlton Davis is anywhere near the athlete or the profile that Stephon Gilmore was. Gilmore, remember, was a top 10 pick when the Bills drafted him. Carlton Davis went in the 60s, I believe it was 4 years ago, from Tampa Bay. So not exactly the same situation. I don't think you're really comparing apples to apples with Carlton Davis and Stephon Gilmore. So when I look at this JC thing, I think it's important to also remember that they've gone this direction with guys in the past. Devin McCourty, Dante Hightower. Just last offseason, in a lot of ways, David Andrews was in a similar boat where they let you go out to free agency, hit the open market, and essentially let the market dictate your value. What is the rest of the league think of J.C. Jackson? If they think he's an $18 million a year player, then maybe they do work out an extension in the 11th hour and bring J.C. Jackson back. How many times have the Patriots let a guy hit free agency and everything feels like he's gone, and then they bring him back, right? I think McCourty and Hightower are probably the two best examples. But even Andrews, I think, is a good example of that too. Now, those weren't $18 million per year contract players, right? But Devin McCourty at the time was the top of the safety market. Dante Hightower was near the top of the linebacker market. So I don't think it's that unprecedented for the Patriots to allow J.C. Jackson to go this direction. And ultimately, I think what it comes down to is that we should remember if they sign him to an extension for multiple seasons, like a 4-year deal, then they can stretch out the cap hits, right? And they can
Right.
make it work by backloading the contract. For example, Matthew Judon signed that 4-year, $54 million contract in free agency with the Pats last offseason. His cap hit in 2021 was only $6 million. So if the Patriots signed J.C. Jackson to a 4-year, $70 million contract, then his cap hit in 2022 is probably going to be half what they would be paying him on the franchise tag, which would give them flexibility to do some other things still. So I'm not surprised that they don't want to handicap themselves behind that $17.5 million number. I would be pretty surprised if they just completely bow out of his market, though. If it gets nuts and we're talking about $20 million a year, Jalen Ramsey type money, then potentially they could just bow out at that point. But if it's going to be realistic, I think 17.5 is the starting point because that's the tag number. 17.5, 18 million per year. I still wouldn't rule out the Patriots bringing J.C. Jackson back at that number. If it gets crazy, then they'll probably do what they do, and we'll be talking about cornerbacks in the draft, or they'll surprise us all and sign Carlton Davis or make another move at cornerback to make up for the loss. Like you said, though, it's a system that needs cornerback talent. They need cover talent in the secondary to run things the way they want to run. And I'm not so sold on them being a full-time zone defense. I think zone defense has its limitations more so than man, especially against good quarterbacks. And if you look in the AFC, you start talking about Josh Allen and some of these other QBs that could potentially be playing in your division or just in your conference with how loaded the AFC is at quarterback. Playing zone against some of these guys is a blessing and a curse, right? I think you can really get yourself into some trouble by just sitting back in zone coverage with lesser cover talent in the secondary when you're taking on Josh Allen twice a year.
Especially, after you pay all that money for a guy like Matthew Judon, and if you're in zone, that's going to kind of limit some of what he's able to do. Even a guy like Christian Barmore obviously isn't going to drop back into coverage, but it changes the way, like, you've built this defense to be a man defense. To suddenly make this switch in 1 year without a personnel overhaul, it's going to be jarring. So
yeah,
I agree with you. I still think there's a chance they could bring him back. I just think his market's going to be absurd. He's a top 5, forget position. I mean, he's clearly the top corner on the market. He's a top 5 free agent on the market in a year where there are teams that have money to spend. Somebody brought up a good point in the chat that the corner needy teams have a lot of money.
Yeah.
So Jackson, there's the report from Mike Giardi. It's going to be a robust market. I believe that. I think that there's truth to that. And I just don't think the Patriots are in a spot where they can compete in a robust market for an elite man press corner.
Right. Right now, PFF has JC as the 6th best free agent on the market, but ahead of him is Devontae Adams and guys that are probably going to get the franchise tag, right? So eventually, when all of the tags and all the extensions are worked out before March 14th, the official beginning of the legal tampering period, really just the official beginning of free agency. By the time all that works out, he's going to be a top 5 free agent on the board, and certainly the number 1 corner on the board. So it's going to be a bidding war for J.C. Jackson. Whoever wins the bidding war is going to be paying him a whole lot of money. Doesn't feel like Bill Belichick is going to want to take part in one of those bidding wars. James Bradbury in the chat, interesting name. Plays for the Giants right now. Good corner, underrated player. Played for Joe Judge. Shaun Wade, obviously, his name is going to consistently be thrown at us, Alex, about what the Patriots feel about Shaun Wade. I think they like the player, but any sort of expectation that he's going to be a replacement for J.C. Jackson is getting extremely lofty with any projections for Shaun Wade, certainly as an outside corner. He struggled big time at outside corner in college in his last year at Ohio State. I think most people project him as more like a nickel or inside corner slot guy, potentially in the NFL level. So, a lot going on there with the Patriots at cornerback. We'll continue to monitor that situation here on the pod, and we'll talk about the cornerback workouts tomorrow when we do the podcast to preview Sunday, and we'll obviously recap it as well, and that will definitely be at the top of mind
Thanks for watching our content of the 6-time Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. Please subscribe to my podcast, Patriots Beat, on our YouTube channel, Patriots Press Pass, or wherever you get your podcasts for a lot more exclusive content right here on the CLNS Media Network.